And today's talk is we're doing kind of a continuing series of Korean Buddhist history, and we're up to the middle 600s, the middle of the 7th century by now. We covered Great Master Jajang and other figures who kind of laid the first foundations of Korean Buddhism, and in the previous lecture, Master Wonhyo, perhaps the greatest genius of them all, of the middle 600s, and today his best friend and a guy, kind of partner side by side with Wonhyo through all of his life with his own very dramatic story, Master Uisang, lived at the same time as Wonhyo and accomplished the great accomplishment of Hwaeom Buddhism, which is still very influential in the world of Buddhism today, and in particular in Korean Buddhism. What he accomplished has lasted for 1,400 years here. Now, the guy I'm talking about, Uisang, and Josa is his title, monastic name, Uisang title, and such, written in Korean and Chinese like that, and he lived in these years. Okay, so he got to be 77 years old, which is pretty good for those days. Such various ritual portraits of him once he had attained great master status that still remain and are venerated in founder shrines in various temples. Now, just the basics I would like to begin with: 4 golden ages of Korean history. 4 times that Korea was culturally flourishing, materially prosperous, militarily strong, had an effective government, etc. The 4th one being right now in South Korea, having started in 1988, something I witnessed. That was pretty amazing, a launch, a takeoff into a golden age. And how long it lasts, nobody knows. But then these 3 previous golden ages, the time when Korea was neo-Confucianist, very strictly and very successfully for exactly 200 years. Back here, more in general, for 250 years, the early Goryeo dynasty, a 2nd golden age. And this lecture is still, of course, back here. We're in the late 600s. In the late 3 kingdoms period, when Uisang was born, and when he died, it was a unified nation, unified Shilla, the beginning of the unified Shilla dynasty. There was a big political change during his lifetime. But that was the first 200 years that you could call a golden age of Korea. And these 2 guys, Wonhyo and Uisang, are some of on the religious, spiritual, cultural side, reasons why it was a golden age. Masters, in this time we're talking about the 3 kingdoms era. This is where we begin until the 660s, traditionally earlier, but not really, etc. Okay. This is the map. The Shilla Kingdom had started as only this area, only this watershed in here, but had grown so spectacular. That's Seoul, that's the Seoul area. Shilla took Seoul by that time and had expanded all the way up here, was getting to a peak of power. And later they lost a little territory, but then surged back and took the whole thing and made Korea as we know it. But this was the Shilla Kingdom. And here, Gyeongju, the capital, and that's where our story begins. The capital city of Gyeongju, which is still today the best tourist place to go in Korea to see the relics. He was born here during the reign of King Jinpyong, which was a very long reign of a king and very successful for like 50 years. He built the nation very well. And in Gyeongju city, and aristocratic family of the king, the Gyeongju Kim family, which is still famous and prestigious today, one of their aristocratic clans. So he was he grew up as an educated young man with a promising future, probably in government office. He should have been in government office. But then, he fell in love with a young girl named Myohwa, beautiful girl. devoted his heart to her and was hoping to be able to marry her. Miaohua is like a delicate flower, is what that means, a delicate flower. However, Korea was at that time already in a tributary relationship with China, where that's not like being a colony, but being a tributary, an independent kingdom, but they sent big gifts to the Chinese emperor every year, and the Chinese emperor would send back gifts, perhaps of somewhat lower value. And a thing of mutual respect, exchanging gifts, and sadly, the gifts included human beings as slaves, as well as gold and silk and such matters, and especially the most beautiful young ladies were often of good breeding and character were sent to be concubines of the emperor of China. Kings and emperors worked that way back then. Miss Miaohua was selected to be sent to the emperor of China. And Uisang, there was nothing he could do. Broken heart, such sadness. And he determined to give up the world. He became a Buddhist monk. Still today, there's more than a few Buddhist monks who enter monasticism for some similar reason all through history. Some people, their parents died. Some people, their beloved wife died, or they lost a girlfriend, or even the children die, and you kind of realize the futility of this world, the futility of clinging and holding on to anything, because it's all so temporary and easily lost. And so we still today, people find some reason to enter monasticism, and today they're kind of screened to make sure that they're just not depressed, whatever, that they're really interested in Buddhism deeply. But anyway, he becomes a Buddhist monk for this reason, and it's during the reign of Queen Sunduk now, who is very important, a very powerful female ruler who followed after Kim Jinpyong, because he didn't have a son, but his daughter was able to take the throne. And her, and then she appointed also a woman to follow her as a crown princess and became Queen Jinpyong, though she only ruled for 7 years afterwards. But the two of them were the only great, powerful female leaders Korea ever had. There in the 600s, those two together right in the middle of the 600s, the only time Korea was ruled by a real powerful woman. There were later in the Shilla Kingdom, by the very end, when things were totally collapsing, there was a female queen ruling, but she really didn't have much power. Her male relatives really ran everything. It was total corruption, so she doesn't count. Otherwise, Korea never had a female ruler for 1,350 years until Park Geun-hye was elected president 4 years ago. Unfortunately, she was a total failure, but that's the first woman leader Korea's had since the 600s. So the significance of this, it's a very patriarchal culture. But she was a queen, and she was a great queen. She ruled the nation very well and continued the upward rise of Shilla to becoming a great power. He was ordained in this great temple, Hwangryongsa, in the center of Gyeongju, which was destroyed and no longer exists. Just the foundation stones remain. They're talking about rebuilding it like this. This central power pagoda had not yet been built, but just around the time when he was ordained, they may have started construction on it when Master Jiazhan came back from China. That's all that remains today. If they rebuild that, it's going to be incredibly expensive, and I don't know if they really can. At Hwangryongsa, upon being ordained, he met an older Buddhist monk, Wonhyo, the subject of my previous lecture in June, and they became tight friends, good friends. Wonhyo being 8 years older than Uisang. The two of them, not finding enlightenment in those days, the quality of Buddhist teaching in Korea was not so high, not so great. It was rather primitive, Korea being kind of a far outpost of civilization. still at that time. They wanted to go to Tang Dynasty China, the world empire at that time, the biggest, wealthiest, strongest country in the entire world by far in the 7th century. Really no competition, as the Roman Empire had totally collapsed by that point. They're going to go study the advanced schools of the greatest masters of the time. They made an overland attempt to go through what is now Manchuria. They were arrested by another kingdom and said to be spies. They could have been executed. They were held in prison for a few months, but then released, and they got to come back home. But they had failed to get to China. Now what's happening here? Buddhism, of course, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha. And 2,200 years ago, it becomes a big religion because of Emperor Ashoka, who adopted Buddhism and spread it through his empire and such. It reached China about 1,900 years ago, that's around 100 AD, such. Spread to Korea by 400 AD. Now, it was at the first just Indian Buddhism coming from India with scriptures and documents coming into China. The Chinese had to take a few hundred years to translate all this stuff coming from India, and huge amounts, 10,000 pages, scriptural collections, trying to translate this into Chinese language, which is totally different from the Sanskrit language of India, totally different. So really hard work of translation, and culturally extremely different also. Just India had ideas and concepts which had never been in China, and vice versa, and they really just had an entirely different outlook on life, entirely, of just what is this world and what is our place in it. Totally different point of view from India, and even a totally different method of expression. Indians tend to talk a lot and say a lot of words, and when a man from India writes a book, he writes 1,000 pages, and the greatest scholar, professor, is the one who writes the most pages of endless philosophy and discursive analytical thought. But in China, quite the opposite. They value to be brief, to be succinct. The great, like the Tao Te Ching, one of the great philosophical classic of China, is only 5,000 words long. 5,000 words. It's like a magazine article today. The Chinese value being brief and succinct. So translating tens of thousands of pages of Indian stuff, and when they really got it translated, first of all, they still truly didn't understand it, and number two, they didn't like it. It was a whole different way of looking at the world, and it just kind of didn't make sense to them, and it was way too many words. We'll get to that later in a moment. So what we started to get, by 500 AD, there starts to be Chinese Buddhism. They'd taken all this stuff for 400 years, working on it, translating it, trying to understand, doing the practices, whatever. But by 500, there start to be great teachers in China coming up with new kinds of Buddhism that is from the Chinese worldview and the Chinese style, the Chinese way, kind of mixing together older Chinese philosophy with these Buddhist ideas, and you get a dozen new schools of Buddhism arising in China. By 500. 3 of them are really great schools of Buddhism that came to Korea, and we cover in this series of lectures that I'm doing over these few years. This is one of them. The Hwaeom Buddhism that this lecture is about is one of those 3 great schools of Chinese Buddhism. It gets going. It got going later than some of the others. By like the late 500s it started, and by the 600s, as we're talking here, Uisang at 640, 650 AD, this kind of Buddhism is flourishing in China, going. There's a great genius master, the 3rd generation master, the greatest of them all, lecturing philosophy to hundreds of disciple students, and it's a whole new way of looking at everything that really resonates with China and became a very big deal in China and then here in Korea. So that's what this is about. Having heard that these new schools of Buddhism, including what we call Zen Buddhism, the Sunbulgyo, that's dominant here in Korea and what's taught in this center, the mainstream of Korean Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, that started around 500 in China also. although supposedly it's a lineage from India, but not really. Okay, so that's what's going on. That's why they want to go to China. China's where it's happening. This new stuff is flourishing, new philosophy. Having failed, he studied here with Master Boduk, and we told this story last time too. Master Boduk was from North Korea, the Goguryeo kingdom in what is now North Korea. He was the top leading Buddhist monk, but then the king of Goguryeo, 10 years before its collapse, the king of Goguryeo converted to Taoism, started following Chinese Taoism, and Master Boduk protested against it and said, "Your Majesty, if you do this, the kingdom will collapse." And the king refused and ignored him. Master Boduk escaped to the south, and then Goguryeo did indeed collapse by invasion from Shilla and China together, and was destroyed and lost to history just 10 years after they adopted Taoism, which is kind of one reason why there was never an official Taoist church here in Korea. All through history, the other Chinese religions came here, but not Dongguk or Taoism. Never had official temples and official monks. Just their ideas, artworks, rituals, herbal medicine, things like that came into Korea and were absorbed by the Buddhism, and later the Confucianists took them for themselves, the best ideas from Taoism, but never officially established here because of that bad reputation of the Goguryeo kingdom collapsing. Master Boduk, in protest, coming to the south, and he became teacher of both Hwaeom and Uisang after they had failed to go overland, taught them basic, more advanced scriptures of what he had gotten from China and such, and furthered their philosophical understanding. However, they were still not enlightened, and they deeply craved enlightenment and more advanced teachings. So again, going to China. To go to China, and this is 661, the historical date, the great time that it happened. This is the most famous story of all Korean Buddhism. And I told it in detail last time, but the two of them then trying to go by ship across the Yellow Sea from Dangjin port. This is Gyeongju, so they had to travel over here to the rival Baekje kingdom, that's the capital, and up here, Dangjin, this is the port where you would sail to China. Still today, it's a port area nearby Pyeongtaek, such. While they were on the shore waiting there, sleeping in a cave overnight, Wonhyo drinks water out of a human skull, and while thinking it's a porcelain cup, and it's delicious water in the deep, dark midnight when he can't see anything. In the morning, that's Uisang sleeping there next to him. In the morning, when they wake up, he realizes it's a human skull and it's dirty water, and he vomits. He's outside here thinking about it. They're both terrified of the tomb in there. They're thinking about it, and suddenly, Wonhyo wakes up. Enlightenment. He realizes it's all in the mind. Whether it's a nice cup or a human skull, whether it's clean water, dirty water, it's all these categories we make up in our mind, and that you can break through that and realize to Buddhahood. He awakens, and Uisang doesn't. But Wonhyo reaches enlightenment. He's got the halo around his head. See, he doesn't, and such. And they got their traveling bags. Then Uisang looks over to the ocean. He says, "Oh, there's the ship. There's the ship to China. Come on, let's go. Get your stuff." And Wonhyo is happy in his enlightenment and says, "I'm not going. I'm not going to China. I don't need to go to China. I have found the truth of the Buddha right here in Korea." And he becomes a great hero to Koreans and much beloved because of that. He stayed in Korea and was enlightened only here. Didn't have to go to China. Uisang, however, Uisang says, "Goodbye, I'm going to the ship. You got enlightened, but I didn't. And I'm going to China to get the stuff." So this is the same story we told last time, but now last time we followed what happened to Wonhyo after this, but now we follow Uisang. Uisang gets over to China by ship to the Shandong Peninsula, and then gets on the Yellow River and barges, poling up the shallow Yellow River all the way down to the capital of China. Okay? While he's going along the river for days and days, they stop every night, and usually the house of a rich man, an aristocrat near the river, they would host Buddhist monks, because it's a good thing back in those days. You know, you host travelers, that's how you find out information about what's going on in other parts of the world. That's how you get by hosting travelers. They were very happy to. That was kind of like getting a newspaper, you know, find out what's happening elsewhere, such. So they welcome Buddhist monks. He stops by the house of the rich man halfway up the river, the Yellow River, and then when they're in there getting their meal, and a girl comes in to serve the meal, and guess what? It's Miao Hua. What are you doing here? What happened? Well, when Miao Hua was being taken with the other slaves and the gifts taken up the river to the Emperor of China, she couldn't stand it. Her heart was also broken, and she couldn't stand to go be a slave in the Emperor's palace. She jumped off the ship to commit suicide, kill herself. She jumped into the river. In those days, nobody could swim. They didn't have a swimming culture in China or Korea until very recently. She jumped in the river, but she didn't die. The river currents flashed her around and then put her against a rock, and she grabbed onto the rock, and she's holding on. And meanwhile, the rich man's house is there. The servants are down at the river washing the clothing. And oh my God, look, there's a girl on that rock. And pull her out, rescue her, take her in. And the rich man, he says, well, you know, you can't go back home to Korea because they'll execute you. And you can't go to the Emperor of China. So you just stay here in my house, and I'll treat you like a daughter. And you can stay here with me. You're obviously a woman of education and breeding and such, and so fine, and be like my daughter. So she had lived there for a few years, you know, like 5 years in a rich man's house, and there she is. She's 19 years old now. And Uisang is there. But Uisang is a strict, disciplined man. He's one who follows the rules and such. And he had taken a vow, a holy, sacred vow, to be a Buddhist monk and renounce the world. And that's what he's going to do, even though she's standing right there. But no, he's going to be. And it hurts, but she understands that. She understands, she knows who he is. He's a real man of principle and will not deviate, so she understands. So he's going to leave, go to the capital, and she tells him, look, I accept, you know, who you are. You're a Buddhist monk, and I believe in you. I think you're a genius. You're going to be a great Buddhist master, I'm sure. And she said, so promise me just one thing. When you're in the capital there, you study, you attain your enlightenment. After that, you come back down, you go back to Korea, you stop here again. Just promise me, you stop here one more time and let me see you as an enlightened Buddhist master, and let me say goodbye properly. Promise me that. And he promised. He swore he would. So then, he goes to the capital of China. There's a big luxurious temple, and the great master Xian is teaching. Now, again, this is the new kinds of Chinese Buddhism, and this is one of the big three: Tiantai Buddhism, Hwaeom Buddhism, and Zen Buddhism, or Chan. This is the Hwaeom Buddhism. This is one of their greatest sculpture places remaining in China now. 600 at the end of the Sui dynasty, flourished during the Tang dynasty, but kind of declined and stagnated in China after that, but not in Korea. In Korea, it flourished for 1,000 years because of Uisang. The Hwaeom Zhong, that means, Zhong means school of Buddhism type. This study center and most of Korean Buddhism is the Joge Zhong. Such, which, and then there's the Taego Zhong and other schools. Okay, this is based, basically, they organized all the different Buddhist teaching, the greatest sutras from India, organized them in a ranking system as far as which one is the best. At the lowest level, the really old original teachings in India that are still used in Sri Lanka and Thailand and Burma, Cambodia, such countries, they consider the lowest level. Then the early Mahayana teachings that had come up through northern India, second level. Final teachings, this is like when Buddhism is getting to China and transforming. These is their third level. The sudden awakening teachings, which is actually Zen, the roots of Zen Buddhism, awakening suddenly like Wonhyo did with his human skull, of just all of a sudden, ding, getting it and such. They have the fourth level, and the complete or perfect teachings of the Hwaeom, which is the Avatamsaka Sutra, and we're going to see that that's the highest level. That's the best one. These other four are valid and true, but it's like, say, elementary school, and then middle school, and then high school, and levels of education and understanding. Okay, this kind of Buddhism, it was the founder, and then Jian, the third generation, established the basic doctrine, became Uisang's teacher, the greatest Buddhist master of China at that time, really teaching this new philosophy in a very dynamic way. Fazang was his number one student, a Chinese boy and such, and he became Uisang's friend and Dharma partner and such with Uisang. The number one disciple, Uisang became number two disciple. I guess there's no way that a foreigner, a Korean, could ever be the number one disciple. But Uisang was known as the number two disciple, Fazang number one, and they remained friends the rest of their life, writing letters to each other about this philosophy. And a later Chong'an was influenced by Uisang here in Korea, things that Uisang wrote in Korea and were recopied and sent to China 2 generations later influenced Chong'an to make new advancements in the philosophy. So it's not, this kind of transmission is not only that everything came from China to Korea. In Wonhyo and Uisang and other cases, and even getting to Confucianism in the 15th century, some great Korean philosophers also made innovations that then went back to China and influenced them and such quite a few times in history. He became second-ranking disciple together with Fazang as number one of Master Jian. They studied together for these 8 years at the Zhongnanshan, which is the south sacred mountain, kind of Namsan area of Jian City, and still today, a great whole range of mountains. Like as big as, even bigger than the entire Bukhansan complex. North of the city here, a great system of mountains full of temples, of Taoist temples and Buddhist temples. They studied down there. Okay, Uisang ends up making this, one of the single greatest documents of Korean Buddhism, the Hwaeom Ilsung Bubge-do, one vehicle Dharma realm chart, called simply the Bubge-do, and I'll call it that from now on, the Bubge-do. Only 210 Chinese characters, and remember what I said about Chinese culture versus Indian culture, 210 words, that's all it is. Now what happened is, it's kind of, this kind of scholastic Buddhism, this is not like Zen Buddhism, where mainly you meditate and meditate until reaching enlightenment. This is a kind of Buddhism where you study and study and study until you reach enlightenment. There is meditation practice in between the studying, yes, but mainly it's studying and understanding the philosophy. And you might take like 20 years to study some scripture, some great scripture, memorize it in 1,000 pages and debate about it and really get to understand it deeply. And then your master says, okay, you're enlightened. You understand this philosophy book, this scripture, you understand it perfectly, and you are qualified to teach the next generation. So this kind of Buddhism is really just like modern university life in a way. You spend years and years of study, and enlightenment is getting your PhD. And it's just about as equally as difficult to pass the final exams and the final interviews and such, and until your master says, yes, you really totally understand this, congratulations. And they give a document, a certificate, a diploma of enlightenment to him, and then you're qualified to be a teacher of younger monks. That's how this works. It's just very much like getting a PhD today. Now, what happened is, the master, after 8 years of study, which is really pretty short, Uisang seemed to be really that he's ready. He's got it. Master said, okay, write me your PhD dissertation, your thesis paper. Write me what you understand about this philosophy. You're under a summary of this philosophy. Uisang wrote 10 volumes, 10 scrolls of writing, say 10 chapters, you might say, of writing. Presented this to his master as his summary after months of work. Master looks through, reads it through, and says, nah, you haven't got it. Not really. You're beating around the bush. Too many concepts, too many words. Try to make it shorter. Try to get to the heart of it, the core. And Uisang goes back to his room and throws that away and meditates for a while and gets it ready and spends a week, and he writes one chapter, one volume, just one scroll of thing, really getting to the core heart of the philosophy. Gives it to the master. Master reads, says, nah, you really haven't got it. Still, you're around. It's too complex. And Uisang's really frustrated. And the master hands it back to Uisang, and Uisang throws his manuscript into the fire. And it burns, and they both watch it burn. But then the master notices that not all of it burns, that there's a few scraps of paper that are not burning in the fire, which is rather weird, kind of miraculous. The master takes his staff and pokes out the pieces of paper, and turns out a bunch of different burned scraps of paper, and there's 210 Chinese characters on all these scraps of paper, just 210 characters. He hands these to Uisang and says, here, make your thesis out of this. Just these 210 characters that didn't burn. Uisang goes back to his room, puts out the papers, meditates on it, and comes up with this diagram. A poem diagram with 7 characters on each line, 210 characters fully, 30 different lines intersecting, going around in a spiraling swastika maze system that intersect in ways that it means something this way and means something the other way, a bit like a crossword puzzle. An ingenious little diagram of 210 Chinese characters that contain the summary, the heart of these 10,000 pages of philosophy. He goes and presents this diagram to his master, and Master Seon says, yes, you got it, you understand. You got it, you graduate. Here's your certificate. You are enlightened. Now, again, this shows just what I was telling you before. In India, again, the scholar who writes 10,000 pages is the best scholar, the one who can talk the longest in the lectures that go on for weeks, and whatever is the greatest thinker, scholar, whatever. The Chinese, they like it brief. This thing we chant, the paper we got, the Heart Sutra. See, that's exactly what that is. It was 10,000 pages of the Wisdom Sutras, a whole collection of sutras of 10,000 pages, the Wisdom Sutras. The Chinese, once they translate the entire damn thing, they're saying, what the hell with all these words? And they edited it down to 1,000 pages of wisdom, the understanding of wisdom, of Buddhist wisdom, and then the next generation, people came along and edited it down to 100 pages, and then to 10 pages, and finally it gets to this exactly what you're holding, one page, which essentially encapsulates all Buddhist wisdom in one chant. That's what the Chinese like to do. And the Koreans inherit from them the briefest. And some of the greatest Buddhist masters of Korea later, the Zen masters, who had who I will lecture about in future lectures. They're famous for like the teaching with no words at all. Teaching without words, and so the right penetrating look at the disciple, who then, I understand. That's what they like. So this is a great example of that entire theme of that cultural difference. And still today, Koreans gonna value the person who says less. He's the wiser person. They don't like overly talkative people like me. All right, so there's such an, he did this and was enlightened. This is kind of like then an information sign officially at the great Hwaeom Buddhist temple that his disciples founded and such about this. And they have implanted this diagram, the swastika-shaped maze is now on stonework with the Chinese characters on each piece of stone in a courtyard of the temple and such, and pilgrims can walk along that pathway chanting this diagram and praying as they walk along the design. There are various different artistic ways. There are dozens of these by now in Korea as a symbol. This diagram of Uisang's from 671 AD is still just one of the most popular symbols in Korean Buddhism and regarded itself as a holy kind of talisman of good fortune even. Uisang then returned to unified Shilla. Now, the country had become unified while he was away. This is kind of fortunate, maybe. He was away for 10 years of civil war, or maybe 8 years, the unification wars of Korea. He was gone. He was in China. By the time he came back home, the war was finished. There was peace and new unified kingdom under great King Munmu. It is said that one reason that he may have hurried up to return to Korea, he thought that he had information from the capital gossip that Tang Dynasty China was going to invade Korea again, and indeed they did after Uisang's return. So he came there to warn King Munmu that, hey, the Chinese might try this again. And the son of the great general Kim Yu-shin defeated those Chinese forces who tried to invade, and they went back to China, and after that really never came back to harass Korea again. The great King Munmu, the great king who unified all of Korea, finished the unification and ruled over a peak of the first golden age, received Uisang with great honor. You know, you have really accomplished something. You got this great school, new school of Chinese Buddhism, and you're an enlightened master of that school. Welcome home. This is what it was back then, the unification. Those three kingdoms had become this. Most of the Goguryeo kingdom up here became the Balhae kingdom. So before, we've always said this is unified Shilla era, the unification of Korea. But now they talk about the two kingdoms era because Koreans are now claiming this Balhae, that it's a Korean kingdom. And so it lasted for about 200 years up here. Balhae, and the Koreans say it's Korean land originally, so that it's the two kingdoms era, not just the unified Shilla era. China, of course, says that that's a subsidiary kingdom of China. Thank you very much. So anyway, this is from Pyongyang, the capital in North Korea, is right up about here and such. So it did include Pyongyang, but what is now the northern half of North Korea, that was lost to Koreans for a long time, for many centuries. And this is why China still claims it today. Future political problems. So he brought this Hwaeom Buddhism to Korea, so he's known as a founder. And this is he got this title, Josa, patriarch, or founder of a Buddhist school. This is maybe the highest title that a Buddhist monk could ever hope to receive after his death. Like Master Wonhyo, probably the greatest genius of Korean Buddhism, is called Desa, Wonhyo Desa, Wonhyo great monk, great monk, but that's not as great as being a founder of a school that endures. Wonhyo started his own kind of Buddhism, but it didn't endure. He didn't really leave behind disciples and an organized system. After he died, his kind of Buddhism just kind of filtered into society in various ways and didn't stay as an organized system. Uisang, a very different kind of a guy. Uisang was an organization man. He founded a school of Buddhism set up in a very organized way, which endured for 1,000 years after he died and is still influential today and such. And so he's known as Josa, founder. Similar title, Jo, is used for the founder of a kingdom or a dynasty, like Taejo Iseonggae. General Iseonggae, who started the Joseon dynasty, has the title Taejo, which means grand founder. It's the same Jo as this, founder, master, Josa. Only a few Korean monks have such a high title remaining. So, in 670, he founded this thing back in Korea. He taught it to Wonhyo. He told his old friend Wonhyo, who was already enlightened, already having his own adventures of scholarship and making booty call on a princess and other amazing stories that I told last time. But he met with Wonhyo and they resumed their friendship, their old friendship, their kind of brotherhood that they had together. And he taught Wonhyo these new Hwaeom teachings, and Wonhyo was very excited, and it really uplifted Wonhyo's own scholarship and brought him to the highest levels of genius. He wrote things then that have endured ever since then, and Buddhist scholars still study what Wonhyo wrote as a result of this new stuff. This is them then together. Supposedly they would have been about 40 years old or so, reunited in friendship. This is called being a doban, is the Korean term, doban. It means brother in the Dharma, brother along the pathway. And this can be sisterhood too. This can apply male and female together or two women together equally as well. But it's a partner, it's a friend along the way to enlightenment. Somebody, who, it's not like being married to somebody or something, but, good friend, close partner, somebody who helps you with your spiritual development. You can meditate together, you recommend books to each other, you have discussions of philosophy in your tight brotherhood. Many monks have this kind of friendship, if they're lucky, with somebody in their life. Doban, it's a useful word. Doban, something, a real companion on the path to enlightenment. And they really were. They're very famous for this. They often hung out together. They're, again, really different kinds of people. Wonhyo was a free-spirited hippie, wandering from place to place, attending village festivals, drinking and dancing with the farmers, and then attempting to, after he made friends with the village farmers, preaching simple Buddhism to them, trying to uplift their spirit, had sex with a princess and produced a baby boy just because he wanted to. And the king said, if the living Buddha wants to have sex with my daughter, that's what he does. What can I say? He's enlightened. His son became the greatest Confucian scholar of the kingdom. Later, also a genius. Just a free-spirited guy, though, going around, didn't set up an organization. Uisang, very strict. Follow the rules. Follow exactly what a monk should do. Very strict. It says don't eat meat. Well, I don't eat meat. Wonhyo's out at the village festivals. Uisang was not drinking with the farmers. No. Strict, disciplined man, but built an organization. But somehow the two of them really understood each other, fully understood each other. There was no superiority or feeling that my way is better than your way. They understood each other's way, that you are who you are and I am who I am. And they were both the greatest Buddhist masters of their era, the two of them, and in an yang sense, yin-yang, as we say, yang, they were perfectly complementary, the free spirit and the disciplined master. They're both necessary. They're both necessary. To make a great Buddhism, you need both kinds of masters. And Korean Buddhism has always had these different strains of the different kinds. I tell my students these days, in class, like look around your life at the university. You've got some professors who are really tough and strict and make you read a lot of books and like are really strict to, exams and very high standards. And you got other professors who are just really human and friendly and teach you person to person and don't care so much about the standards and grades or whatever. And both are really good for education. You should have one of each kind of professor, on and on. You need some balance in your life to get a good education. Children need a mother and a father, different kinds of love. You need strict and you need the heart, both at times. And these two, they really exemplify that as a very different kind of character, but they're both equally great. Part of my thesis in this whole lecture is about how Wonhyo is so famous, and Koreans love Wonhyo, and Koreans promote Wonhyo internationally. He's one of the Korean figures of history that they really put out there for the foreigners to know about, publishing books in English and videos and such. Uisang is undervalued, and I'm trying to tell you, Uisang was equally important, equally valuable with Wonhyo. Wonhyo gets all the reputation, and people love him because of the sex with the princess and the drinking and dancing and the brilliant scholarship and the free-spirited way. He's the character. But Uisang, equally important in what was accomplished very much. He is undervalued, underpraised. He should be better known. The two of them should really be known together as a pair that really works. Very famous is their My Fish story, Uisang Temple, which is still existing nearby Pohang City today. Watching fish in the pond, and two fish were dead, floating at the top of the water. Each one of them used their magic powers, try to revive the fish. Fish look identical, all right? They look the same as every other fish of the same species. They each one used their powers trying to revive, and one of the fish came alive and started swimming around again. And then they both started pointing and saying, "That's my fish." "No, it's my fish. That was my fish that did it." And because all the fish look identical, this is so absurd and so ridiculous. So they collapse in laughter, just in laughter. This is the really enlightened Buddha laughter incident about this. And there's some certain dirtier and more scatological versions of this story too. But this is that temple today, still existing. That temple next to the waters in Pohang. It's a lovely place. And they have this hat in here. Wonhyo had his own hermitage uphill from the temple. There still is a Wonhyoam hermitage. And digging down around the foundations, they found this old bamboo fiber hat. And they claim it's Wonhyo's hat. Although that's pretty unproven and don't know, but they have it in a museum there. And they say that's Wonhyo's hat. Now, Uisang left about 70 temples that still exist. That's pretty impressive. Wonhyo supposedly left 66 temples. Some of them are disappeared. Most of them are very small, very minor temples, just hermitages. There's some, basically it's just like a shack that he built when he was traveling in the mountains, a shack he built to meditate in for a while and then moved on. Later, people found it and elaborated it into more of a temple, but still a small, modest temple far away in the mountains, generally such. Uisang built great temples down in the valleys, using royal money, the authority from King Munmu, the money, the construction power of the soldiers. He built big, great temples to teach monks in and such, including 5 out of these 70 temples. 5 are today some of Korea's greatest monasteries, among the top 10, top 20 temples of the entire nation out of 10,000. 5 of them were founded by Uisang and his disciples. So that shows something. He left a lasting legacy. Can't verify it all. So he's called the temple builder master. The temple builder. Many of the great ones. Again, him as great master mode by this time in his seniority, by the time he gets to be 60 years old, and he is the organizational master of Korean Buddhism of his generation, with his friend Wonyo being the inspirational figure of his generation, that he was the master. This leads to what's called the Hwaeom Shipja, 10 greatest temples of Hwaeom, that Uisang is said to have had 1,000 disciples under him, and 10 of them really reaching the highest level of perfect enlightenment under his care. And he built 10 great temples, or had them built even after he died, a couple of them. So each of the 10 disciples built his own or refurbished an old temple into a bigger monastery. In the case of Bulguksa, the 10 great temples of Hwaeom Buddhism, which for a while were established. More than 3,000 disciples studied in these temples in these days during the first golden age. 3,000 disciples. This was a very successful Buddhist organization. This is what remained. The Hwaeom Shipja, 5 of them considered great temples of Korean Buddhism, and 3 of them are in the top 108. The top, out of 10,000 temples, we have this system. There's 108, which is a holy Buddhist number, old temples of the nation that are considered the best, the supreme temples and such, and 3 are within the top 108 at least, and 2 of them do not exist anymore, just due to history, war, whatever. Okay. Now, the locations of these, if you care to get technical, they're all in national parks and provincial parks generally. Okay, by 671, at age 46, the first of these, his first great temple, Busoksa, with Myohwa's help. Now this story, remember, Uisang and his girlfriend Myohwa, and he promised to see her one more time coming down the river. Remember that? While Uisang was 8 or 9 years away in the capital, Myohwa, at the rich man's house, embroidering a beautiful silk robe, the very best silk of China, gold embroidery with fantastic dragons and phoenixes and holy symbols, a true robe for a great Buddhist master, because she was sure Uisang was going to become a great Buddhist master. She had the confidence. She was making a robe to really fit such a great master. And she wanted to give him the robe as her gift, as a way of showing that I understand you're going to be a Buddhist monk and you can't be my husband. I understand, and I accept that, because that's who you are. So here's the robe, your master's robe, to signify that. But Uisang got to the rich man's house at nighttime, and most people are still sleeping, and he slept overnight at the house. He woke up early the next morning. He's supposed to see Myohwa, but he wakes up early, 4:30 a.m., the meditation, and he feels just still vulnerable in his heart. He can't stand it. He can't stand to face her again. He's shy about it, and he runs away. He gets his people, his servants, and such, says, come on, go to the boat. Let's get out of here, and such. And by 5:30, Myohwa wakes up and such, and she got the robe. What? He's gone? What? And she yells at the servants of the rich man's house, get the boat. And she chases him down the Yellow River. This should be a Hollywood movie. It really should. This is a great story. She chases him down the Yellow River with her boat, and they get down to the cliffs of Yantai, which is still the main port going to Korea. And still today is where the ferry boat from Korea comes in, Yantai, some high rocky cliffs above port docks. And she gets out there to the cliffs, and Uisang's ship is there, and she's like, wait, stop, don't go. But Uisang sets sail. They take off, leaving from the dock, and Myohwa up there, and she, in such frustration, she throws the robe at the ship, and then she jumps to commit suicide. Again, for the second time. This girl needs therapy. I should have been taking Xanax or something, whatever, but she jumps to her death for the second time. This time she's successful. She, flying through the air down, she hits the robe and falls on top of the robe, which has magic sacred power in it, and hits the water. And yes, she's dead, but immediately reincarnated as a benevolent female dragon. An ocean dragon, a dragon of the water. Uisang's ship sails away, and a storm comes up, as often on the Yellow Sea, a bit of a typhoon coming in, big waves, Uisang's in trouble, the ship, and the dragon comes and saves the ship and brings it into port safely. So she's not a vindictive old girlfriend, even though rejected. She's still on his side. And people say, when he goes to the capital and meets the king and starts his ministry, people often say, when Uisang is going along, there's a cloud behind him, and this cloud is sparkling, dancing, moving. And people say, my God, there's a dragon following Master Uisang, protecting him. How the hell is this? And then he gets out to this. He goes up north from the Shilla capital to the old borders of the Baekdu Daegan Mountains that made the old northern border of the capital Shilla, but now Shilla's expanded beyond that. But he goes to the most sacred holy mountain, the mountain that's already very sacred to shamanism and mountain worship and the heavenly worship done from its peak. And it's still today a major mountain of shamanism for Korea. It's called Taebaeksan, the Grand White Mountain. He goes there and he finds an excellent spot and says, I'm going to build my temple here at this holy, shamanic, spiritual mountain. The problem is the common people of that area, the villagers, are still very shamanistic, and they worship the mountain spirit, the Sanshin mountain spirit, at that place, that very holy, excellent site right there on the slopes of the far southwestern slopes of Taebaeksan. They worship the mountain spirit there. And so they make a riot, a demonstration. They say, no, get out of here. Because in those days, it was still like this way among common Korean people. Often, it was like, this is a foreign religion. Buddhism, what are you talking about? Foreign religion. It came from some other country. We are Koreans. We worship the mountain spirit. Get out of here with your foreign doctrine, religion. Forget it. And they told him, no, you may not make a temple. And the villagers are rising up, demonstration, getting violent. And then, you can guess, you know what happens next. Yes, the dragon shows up. The dragon shows up, and dragons are invisible, by the way. Only enlightened people can see them. You and me, we can't see them. The dragon lifts this giant rock up over the people who are violently demonstrating, lifts us up. This is Master Uisang, enraged, anger at this, that they won't let him build a temple here. And so it lifts the rock over, threatening to smash these people. This is rather violent story and such. The people seeing this are terrified. A giant rock, a big boulder floating in the air above them. They bow down, finally kneel and say, okay, the power of the Buddha, we accept Buddhism, okay, you build your temple here. Go ahead. And Master Uisang promised them, he said, I will also, next to my Buddhist temple, I will build a Sanshingak, a shrine for the mountain spirit, and you can still worship there. And this integration helped. And still today, there are mountain spirit shrines in Korean Buddhist temples for this reason that the people can still do that kind of veneration. Buddhism accepts it. So with this, it was overcome with Myohwa's power. This boulder, this rock right here, this is it. This is the rock The rock settled down next to the site where Uisang, right next to this, built the main hall of the temple. It's called the Busuk, and the floating rock. And these Chinese characters here, supposedly Uisang himself carved these Chinese characters, floating rock, on there, and it's regarded as a very holy item of Korean Buddhism, the actual Busuk. And it's right next to the main hall. This is the main hall of the temple and the meditation view pavilion, the poetry pavilion right there, and the Busuk is like right over here next to it. And it made essentially one of the greatest temples of Korean Buddhism and one of the most beautiful in the Taebaeksan Mountains. Still stands today, never was destroyed by the Japanese invasion of the Imjin War 400 years ago, nor the Korean War. No war ever destroyed this temple. And this building in the back, this building, the main hall, the Busuk is right there, and such. This building is then the second oldest wooden building in Korea. The main hall of Sudoksa Temple in Chungcheongnam-do has been discovered to be 6 years older, 6 years older than this one. Previously, this one was called the oldest in the nation, but now this, the Muryang Sujeon, is the oldest one in Korea. And it's a beautiful temple on and off there, great scenery, great surroundings in every way. This pagoda was built from Uisang's time, from the late 600s. Still stands, two of them, two pagodas like this. The great bell tower. And through there, you can see that this is pages of my website that you can see more in detail. Very famous poetry pavilion, the Anyang-ru, where generations, for hundreds of years, poets, great poets, sat here and enjoyed the view, a truly fantastic landscape view out over the valley and the river and such, and beautiful sunsets and such visible. And poets sat there and wrote poetry about the view for like all of the Joseon dynasty, including some of Korea's most famous poets. And then their poems were written on wooden boards and put up inside of this pavilion. It's just so famous for the view that it offers. And this is the Muryang Sujeon, the second oldest wooden building, and it means the building of immeasurable life, infinite life, kind of a promise of the infinite reincarnation, and it still has the old original signboard up on it, amazingly, and such. It's that old. It's been refurbished a few times, but basically still the same structure. And this stone lantern is also very historic from Uisang's time. This pagoda up here might contain the relics of Uisang, his funeral relics. Otherwise, we don't know where those are if it's not in here, but we don't know for sure because there's no inscription or whatever that tells us. That might be Uisang's memorial stupa. Inside that building, this one of the handsomest Buddhas of Korea, a really good one, made of clay and then gilded with gold and with a beautiful flaming bronze nimbus behind it with fire flames. A very beautiful Buddha statue, one of the great ones of Korea, national treasure in itself, and these old pillars from like the 1370s. These pillars were carved. So it's one of the great things, a bit of the view you can see in one direction from up there. Fantastic place. A great temple. This is their opening gate and such, and it says Grand White Mountain Floating Rock Temple. And even though actually the Grand White Mountain is 23 kilometers away from here, the actual peak of it, and such, but it's such a great mountain that every mountain circling around it is considered to be part of the Grand White Mountain. That signboard right there, yes. Taebaeksan Busoksa. There you go. All that. Beautiful place in the autumn. The red leaves. Winter. Oh yeah, the pond in front with fountains, restaurants. It's quite a tourist attraction place, you can imagine. They do a temple stay program sometimes. It's a wonderful place. You can stay overnight. Just one of the best looking. Here's the part of the view on a cloudy, foggy morning. One of the best places in Korea you might want to stay. Okay. Behind that great main hall is a shrine for, guess what? For Sunmyo. Sunmyo, the immortal mystery, also known as Myohwa, the delicate flower, a shrine for her assistance in construction of this temple. Old shrine, this has been modernly rebuilt. The old one just really fell apart. But there was an old shrine here. Inside the portrait, that's Uisang's girlfriend. In there, inside her own shrine, people leave offerings and bow and such to her spirit still today. That's her. Inside, in the clouds, kind of right on the clouds, she's holding the box with the silk robe. That's the silk robe she was going to give to Uisang. That's her. She becomes kind of a goddess, a patron goddess of Buddhism. There she is. There's the story again. And the Busok, there's myself at the Busok in 2009, showing you how big it is. And it kind of looks like it's floating or something. It looks like it's ready to fall down. Can't see how it's staying in one place, but it does. And here, Busok. Yeah, the Chinese characters that Uisang carved, still preserved. Standing from the other side of it. And they used to have this collection of old Buddha statues right next to the Busok on the other side of the main hall, but these are now in a temple museum that they built, which still isn't fully open, but under construction. Myohwagak. The Sunmyogak was looking that bad in the 1980s, etc. Now, above that temple is the Josadang. Remember, I've taught you what Josa means, founder master, Josa. And a great master like this at the greatest temple that they founded, there is a separate shrine building just for that master and perhaps for other great masters who have served at that temple, so that contemporary monks can go to a building like this and respect the founders of this kind of Buddhism. It's veneration, it's not worship. They don't worship the former Buddhist monks, but they give them veneration. And this was also one of the very oldest buildings in Korea. When I first came to Korea, it was listed as one of the oldest. It's now controversial about that. Some of the original woodwork still remains, but they had to reconstruct the walls. They were just falling apart and falling down. They had to rebuild it halfway. So maybe 40% or so. I heard one professor told me 40% of this wood is original wood. And the foundation was rebuilt, but essentially the same stones, most of the same stones. So do you consider it's still the same building and therefore one of the oldest buildings in Korea? Or would you say now 60% new construction is not enough, doesn't qualify? Different professors have different opinion on that and such. It has this cage out front. Notice this cage with a tree inside of it. The Josadang. Inside, a very old statue of Master Uisang and a painting of Uisang and monks attending him, royal court scenes, various activities of Uisang in there. This is from the other side, that painting and details here. This painting is in there on one side. Other great masters who served there at Busoksa over the centuries ever since, guardian painting. And also there's another painting of good old Myohwa in here. Then this cage outside is interesting. There's a tree inside there, a small tree. People say that after Wonhyo died and his disciples built this josadang to memorialize him, and he had his old walking staff that he used to use, walking stick, as an old man, and they just put it outside the josadang and just leaned it up against the wall. But they said after one time, after many people offered prayers and veneration for Uisang in a big ceremony there, the walking stick sprouted roots and put roots right into the stone foundation of the porch of the building and came alive as a tree and remains ever since for 1,300 years as a sacred tree, memorial, standing in living memorial to Master Uisang. Scientifically, this is not really true at all, and such, but Buddhist believers believe it's true, and so many Koreans came and were picking leaves and breaking branches off of this tree to take as like a good fortune souvenir, believing that this holy thing would keep it in your pocket, it'll bring you good luck and prosperity, that they had to build the the metal cage all around the tree to save its life, because too many tourists trying to pick its leaves. So now the tree grows and flourishes. Indeed, its roots are going right through the stone foundation there, which is pretty amazing in itself, but that still remains. Inside that building, the Josadang, the walls that were falling apart contained these paintings from the 1370s, 1380s. Some of the oldest wall mural paintings left in Korea. These were lovingly rescued from the crumbling walls and put into the temple museum. Now, they are national treasure as a collection of paintings, a national treasure in themselves. Yes, that are here. Bodhisattva image. It's too old and faded, but it's a real part of Korean history. It's some of the oldest paintings we have, especially of the wall painting sort of guardian figures, bodhisattvas, whatever. You can see them now in the Temple Museum. They put reproductions of them back into the building, and this is me with students there at that building one time. Okay, good. Let's go back to our story. Okay. That was his first great temple. Now, another great story I got to tell you. We're short on time, and there's too many stories about Uisang about this, but this one, Naksansa, must be told. It is another one of the 108 greatest temples of Korea. It's not one of the Hwaeom Shipjal. It's not one of the 10 grand monasteries that Uisang established to teach thousands of disciples his way. It's a much smaller place, but still regarded as extremely holy, as I will show you why. And it's right on the east coast. Its name is Naksansa, which means Potalaka Mountain, which is Putoshan in China. It's the home of the Bodhisattva of compassion. Okay. Also founded in 671, supposedly. I don't know how he can do both in 1 year, but that's what they say. This is it. It's right near the east coast, right on the cliffs of the east coast, in between Soraksan National Park, Odaesan National Park, in between Sorak and Gangnam, a small town called Yangyang, a very beautiful area for tourism, and this temple is there. Major pilgrimage temple. Okay. It is the Korean Doryang, another vocabulary to learn, besides Doban, which is the same do on there, the way, the pathway. A Doryang, a Bodhimanda, in Sanskrit, which means the residence of a god or a spirit, the residence of a deity, where that deity lives and resides in a special spiritual way. Therefore, the best place for us human beings to come and do spiritual practices. Every major bodhisattva has a doryang somewhere that is the home of the bodhisattva, sort of. Think of it as a system of residences, a place you can go, especially go and contact that deity and do special prayers, special meditations, special prostrations for that figure. And this, for the bodhisattva of compassion, representing the heart, one of the top 4 kinds of bodhisattva in Korea, this is the primary home, found by Master Uisang. A generation before him, and this was my lecture 3 lectures ago, Great Master Jajang, he came back from China and found the doryang of the Bodhisattva of wisdom here in Korea, in the Odaesan Mountains, what's now the Odaesan National Park. That's the doryang, the special practice for the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Uisang, 30 years later, finds this doryang of the Bodhisattva of compassion also in Korea. China has a great system. China has 4 great mountains for the 4 great bodhisattvas that are primary doryang. In Korea, it's kind of a more complicated system. There are multiple places for each of them. But there are 3 other Gwanum doryang for the Bodhisattva of compassion, 3 other major ones in Korea: Yeonggungsa Temple near Busan, Hyangilam Hermitage on the far south coast on the Yeosu City Peninsula, and on the west, close to Seoul here, Gangwon Island, just offshore, the Bodhiam Temple, Bodhisa, now it's called. Bomunsa, that's right, Bomunsa, Treasure Gate Temple, not Bodhi. Bomun Temple, just off Gangwon Island. Those are the other 3 main things, but this was the first one. And such. There's a beautiful photo by Tom Coynier, in fact, of their old pagoda from Uisang's time that's been kind of rebuilt. Now, the story here is really great again. Uisang came, and on this cliff end here, built a little shack and such, and was meditating there by the ocean. And the ocean coast, that's where the Bodhisattva of compassion appears, according to ancient Buddhist scriptures. So he was kind of perhaps looking for him there, and he meditated on there. And while he was meditating, he stood up for a little stretching and exercise, and a gust of wind came and blew his meditation cushion off the cliff into the water, and it was floating there. And he had an inspiration. He jumped in after it, might have drowned, but got on the meditation cushion and sat there, just in meditating, in floating on the water. And then it floated around this bend here where there's a cave. There's an ocean cave in the cave of rock, and the ocean enters at the bottom of it. And the current took him in there, sitting on his meditation cushion, and there was rough, wild waters splashing around inside that cave. There still are today. It's still like that. And in that cave, the Bodhisattva of compassion appeared to him, together with the Yongwang, the dragon king of the sea, which is another subject I will lecture on later this fall at the Royal Asiatic Society. The Yongwang, the king of the dragons, appeared together with the Bodhisattva of compassion together in the cave and rescued Uisang from his difficulty. So this is again looking down on that's the place he was meditating, and this photo is taken from the Hermitage that I'm about to show you, the Hermitage down to the meditation. But this is a really beautiful part of Korea, and this is a famous place for tourism. even for people who have nothing to do with Buddhism, Christians or whatever, come here for tourism because you can see why. This is then the hermitage. From that meditation pavilion, looking upwards, this hermitage there, he built this, and this is right above the cave. The rocky cave is down in here, out to the ocean from there. It's right above this. Inside, it's a small little hermitage shrine building with a statue of the Bodhisattva of Compassion. It's got a wooden floor, and there's a hole, a square hole in the wooden floor with a kind of a stopper. And after you do 108 bows to the Bodhisattva of Compassion in recognition, then the nun who lives there will take out the stopper and let you look down through the hole into the cave of the ocean cave of water where the water is churning and splashing around inside where the Bodhisattva, exactly where the Bodhisattva appeared to Uisang. You can look from there straight down into the cave. It's pretty amazing. It's called Hwaeom, the Red Lotus Hermitage, red lotus flower. Another view, the nun stays there taking care of it, and the Hwaeom Hermitage. One of the holiest places of Korean Buddhism, really a place of pilgrimage. And people come there with a very serious worshiping aspect and treat this area as very special, but also it's just so physically beautiful place to visit. It's really impressive. Naksansa Temple, Hwaeom Hermitage. A unique place. Very famous to go there and see the sunrise. So many photographers. I have stolen their work here. None of these is mine. But so many photographers capture the sunrise from this area. At New Year's, this is incredibly crowded with Koreans praying to the first sunrise of the year. Okay. Now, what is this philosophy, the Hwaeom philosophy? We haven't even got much time to go into this philosophy that Uisang brought to Korea. Time check. Yep, well, we're running out. Always too much to say. But the Hwaeom philosophy, it's called the flower garland philosophy in English is what this means. A bunch of flowers with their stems woven together, so therefore like a Christmas wreath of European culture. And the flower is an enlightened node, each different point of an enlightened being, and the stem coming from it, the basis of it, and such, woven together in one unit. Therefore, this flower garland, this idea, what it really means is that everything is connected to each other. That, as we say, all is one, one is all. Now, this Avatamsaka Sutra, that's the name in Sanskrit, and the various names, it's called Hwaeom in Chinese, Kegon in Japanese, and this in English, flower garland, etc. It's got all these different names, but this is the history of that sutra. Technically, not so interesting. It does have some grand themes to it, although a very vast and complex philosophy. The progression along Buddhist path in stages with a sense of pilgrimage from one site to another site to another site, getting more enlightened, understanding better, etc. This idea of the Bodhisattva of Compassion by the seaside, the Suwul Gwanum paintings, water moon Gwanum from the Goryeo dynasty. Once this philosophy fully flowered in Korea, and they're making these most magnificent paintings of the Goryeo dynasty. Some of the greatest paintings of Korean history come from this philosophy. Also, Buddha statues, universal Buddhahood of all reality. This Buddha who represents kind of the ultimate reality Buddha, doing this hand gesture, which means heaven, earth, and humanity united as one, or it means the jewel in the lotus, or the unity of yin and yang. It can have all these various meanings, that gesture, but essentially talking about unity, cosmic unity. And in a sense, this Buddha, Birobul, the whole universe is his body. And everything in the universe is like, imagined as one molecule, one atom, or one cell of the body, of this one body. The whole galaxy is one great Buddha of enlightenment, and we are all just parts of that. This kind of idea, the unity of the absolute and the relative, and the individual with the whole cosmos, all in one in all is one, or all, one is all, that kind of thing, that most people in the West associate that kind of term with Zen Buddhism. It's kind of a common Zen joke, like, what did the Zen Buddhist monk say to the New York hot dog vendor? Goes up to buy a hot dog in New York, the Zen Buddhist monk, and he says, "Make me one with everything," which is what people say in New York when they're getting a hot dog, with everything, ketchup and relish and mustard and all, and such like that. Make me one with it. It's a common thing about Zen, but it really comes from this philosophy, not Zen. This is the philosophy of absolute cosmic unity, that we are all really one, and we're one with everything around us. Our separateness is an illusion, and it's the kind of illusion that keeps us unenlightened and suffering in the world. When we break through and have the cosmic realization of our essential unity together as humans, and with all the animals and all the species in the biosphere, and even with the material force of the world around us, that sense of cosmic oneness, which is present really in every religion in the world in some different way, and such, that is the true pathway towards enlightenment, that understanding. This in the West, there's Western tradition, in every religion, I say, and even a guy like John Muir, who was not religious, who really, his religion was nature. John Muir is the one who started national parks in America, the whole idea of a national park. And he loved the wilderness, he loved nature, he loved mountains, and he had, this is one of his quotes from him, and he could have been a philosopher of Hwaeom Buddhism, perhaps, to say something like this, in this way. The interconnectedness and interdependency, that everything not only connected together, but kind of depends upon each other. We don't exist without each other and such. We're all essential parts of the whole, and every kind of there's a communication and interpenetration between everything around. The way that it is kind of literally true, and scientists like Carl Sagan and now Neil deGrasse Tyson and such are pointing this out, how we're breathing in and out and taking in food and excreting. We're exchanging molecules and atoms with the rest of the world. We are stardust. Essentially, we are chemical particles that have come from the stars burning in explosion and have settled as cosmic dust here on this earth, making all the different elements that now make biological life, and we're constantly exchanging with everything. We're part of this environment. And if this leads to thinking of ecology, that if we take care of the environment, if we have a healthy biological environment, then we'll be healthy and we can be fairly happier. We keep that. If we destroy the natural environment around us, we become polluted too, and we suffer. And with all the cancer and things that are happening from that these days, turns out to be kind of true. The oneness of everything, essentially. And each part of the world mutually reflects the totality of the cosmos. In each dust mote of these worlds, all countless worlds and Buddhas, from the tip of each hair of Buddha's body are revealed the indescribable pure lands, the indescribable infinite lands, all assemble in a hair's tip. Every little thing reflects the universe in itself. Other mystics of other religions have agreed. And even truth is understood as encompassing an interpenetrating falsehood. This is kind of a Chinese Taoist kind of philosophy of realization that you can't have truth without lies. Also, they mutually interdepend. Truth contains falsehood. The falsehood of this world is part of a bigger truth. Or as Bob Dylan once said, oppositely, Bob Dylan wrote, all the truth in this world adds up into one great big lie, which is kind of the opposite way of putting it. But these things are, all these mind-made distinctions collapse into enlightened understanding. Okay. This influenced Buddhism. Uisang wrote things that traveled to China, to Japan, and influenced Buddhism for hundreds of years. It changed. He had this dialogue going with Fazang, his friend, who the chief disciple, became the next great master of this Buddhism in China. They kept a correspondence going back and forth, and those letters were very valuable to Buddhists in all of East Asia, and his legacy has remained more than 1,000 years in all these countries and such. We get to I'm going to get to, that's in like the Goryeo dynasty. This is coming out of hundreds of years. I'm going to do that in a future lecture. We kind of run out of time here. That diagram, the Ilsam Bobbegedo Wontongi, that swastika diagram, still used in Korean Buddhism today. It's still studied in the Buddhist colleges, like right here at Dongguk. This philosophy and Uisang's innovations in this philosophy are still studied right here, where monks getting their master's degree or whatever kind of such, along with Wonhyo's teachings, still considered essential things. And this dynasty and Master Bojo, who finally unified Korean Buddhism, brought together theoretical scholastic Buddhism with Zen Buddhism, brought them together, unified them by 1200 AD, very much leaned on Uisang's philosophy of oneness as one of the key aspects of what he brought together as a unified national Buddhism, the Jogye order, which still remains today, mainstream Korean Buddhism. For 800 years, this is the only country in all of Asia that has one unified national Buddhism to talk about. Every other country is divided into different schools, but he united it under Uisang and Wonhyo's inspiration and difference. It's still used in Yebul ceremonies. People still chant that diagram still today in Buddhist temples all over the nation, and it's part of the philosophical education and such. These great statues of this kind of Buddha, the Biro Buddha of this kind of Buddhism, is still a key feature in many temples of Korea. This one, Bulguksa, one of the great Hwaeom temples that still remains to today as some of the greatest artwork in Korea. That statue is a national treasure. And 26 other examples in the museums. Such. And to really understand this kind of Buddhism and how it developed in Korea, a professor who is much greater than me, much deeper, Richard McBride, wrote this landmark book just like 6 years ago, which is really a great book if you want to get academic and deep and technical about what is this kind of Buddhism and how it developed for hundreds of years in Korea and such. This book, Domesticating the Dharma, is really fantastic. And I've met him personally, Professor McBride, and he's a very good man. One of the best of the new younger generation of Korean scholars working in English and such. More about all this, these temples, the temples that Uisang founded, more photos, more information, whatever, as always, on my website. Thank you very much for listening.